Concoctions have been in a state I would consider to be iffy. They have promise. They just don't have the capabilities to deliver on them. Well, not yet at least. Right now, concoctions act as a framework that wants to provide the needed platform to facilitate different kinds of builds and be generic enough to not become dominant in some niches, but the foundation is rocky. It often feels too generic, and there's a limited amount of tools available to fix it. I've played concoctions for some time now, and have tried various builds involving using them as my main skill, which has been painful to say the least, but I've gleaned much information, including identifying the problems that hold this archetype back. One of those systems is actually charge generation and charge sustain. Trying to generate and sustain your flask charges is quite difficult, especially when using a concoction as your main skill. Bring your attention to the charges per second notables on the tree. On their own, these are practically unnoticeable. It's basically a waste if you don't intend to invest into it, and that's if you take the math at face value, which is an extension to the problem. To my knowledge, this has been an issue since the launch of the game, including the incorrect numbers in the character sheet. But with the advent of increased charges gained, reduced charges used, and a lot of investment, we can get to a point where it's less impossible to sustain charges, yet the problem persists. Despite getting to a somewhat decent spot in the late game, you're still not able to reach that point without very endgame gear. In the campaign, it is nigh impossible to use concoctions without running out of charges, the driving factor being the lack of methods to help generate them. If the brew concoction node instead granted 1 mana flash charge on hit with cooldown matching that of the rage on hit effect, it would help alleviate this pain point. The base amount is low, and while it can be scaled, it won't get out of hand in the late game. The same treatment could be given to the Enduring Elixirs node, but instead granting a life flash charge. Pathfinder is missing a part of an alchemist fantasy, and this change seeks to remedy that. Not only providing the means to use flask-related effects more freely, but also providing a much-needed platform for concoctions to work with. It would also make it possible to use them in campaign, which is the primary hurting point for this archetype. However, even if your flask charges are sustainable, you'll quickly notice another fundamental hurdle. These are Ascendancy Skills, and the drawback to this fact is well known at this point. The lack of quality application, rigid socket and level thresholds, it makes their progression feel more determined and outside of the player's control. When it's on a skill that is either triggered or used as supplementary, it's something you notice every now and then when you go to upgrade your skills or equipment, but when it's your main skill, it's at the forefront of your scaling problems, and you are always made aware of it when your damage starts to taper off or you get a Jeweler's Orb, especially a perfect Jeweler's in early maps. And you'll often wonder why Ascendancy Skills are stored in remove-only tabs. The progression for Ascendancy Skills are rather strict, and often you are better off leveling your character with a different build before respecializing, and that usually includes something that isn't unarmed. It's an obvious observation, the need to be unarmed. It could be seen as strength in some cases, but the downsides that surround it are far too great to overlook. This is also an issue that plagues facebreakers and holopalm technique. Weapons just provide more than what unarmed builds can, and for that reason they really struggle to scale into the late game and need a bunch of investment to get working. The problem isn't the lack of a weapon, but rather the lack of ways to scale these skills, and that's very apparent with concoctions. At least with facebreakers and holopalm, there's some way to help scale your skill stats or damage, but concoctions don't get anything. Most people already know how fast holopalm falls off in maps compared to quarterstaves. Though there's also another side to the argument. Unarmed builds shouldn't be too powerful, otherwise people would not use weapons since they require more investment later on. Which, I fully agree with. Unarmed builds should not outshine those that use weapons. In fact, I'm of the opinion that unarmed builds should inherently be weaker, but not by this much. The disparity between using a weapon and being unarmed is a night and day difference. Weapons can outright get better stats, there's also the factor of affixes and the dominance to plus the skill levels. There's a reason concoctions in Path of Exile 1 scale off of your flask recovery amount. It's to close the gap between the two, not make them equal. And yet the problem goes beyond even that. Stats can be substituted, worked around, but it's the lack of behavioral effects that seriously hurt this archetype. Basically, every concoction build has multi-shot in it, because it's the only support that affects concoction's projectiles, and does something substantial enough. Split, fork, pierce, and chaining doesn't work because of how the projectiles are designed, including chaining from terrain. But just mentioning chaining along with concoctions probably puts the fear of innocence into the development team. but there's a reason why it is beloved. It makes an otherwise plain skill do something extraordinary, something that fundamentally changes how you approach the skill that rewards experimentation and investment. Does that mean we should get PCOB? No! Please, no. I don't want to play it in both games. It would be better if each concoction had its own behavioral effect that ties into their identity. That way there's individuality and better spread of build diversity. In a previous video I had a whole segment going over each individual's concoction and how I would have designed them. But here is the abridged and updated version. You can pause and examine it if you like. And to boot, I've designed uniques that could be used by any class, and would also work with concoctions. Which brings me to the last segment of this video. Having said the main part, I wanted to yap about a question that has been a persistent thought in my mind. At what point would giving concoctions depth and complexity outgrow their design as Ascendancy Skills? While making the designs I presented, I had to fit them in the confines of what I believe Ascendancy Skills are allowed to do. They can't be exceptional at what they do, instead having to balance identity with generality. I think that's the word. Many of the older Ascendancies have been stuck in this limbo for some time now. So my next question will be, when should identity steer an Ascendancy beyond generality and give it personality? There are various Ascendancies that fall into this general category. Not because they are general enough to provide the opportunity to do many things, but because they have nothing unique that they excel at. That's why I have a dislike for many different nodes. Sure, they are amazing, but they are generically amazing, not something that's unique to the identity of the Ascendancy. It's why I'm advocating for concoctions to be more niche in their designs. Pathfinder needs an anchor, something to provide the opportunity to make unconventional builds, and place a focus on our alchemist fantasy. Concoctions can be their anchor. They just need to be given the opportunity to be. As much as I'd like to talk more, I'd rather end it here with a small note. Despite the fact that concoctions are in a bad state, that won't stop me from trying to play them, even if it hurts. And to those that are willingly playing concoctions in their current state, I commend you. Our stubbornness is sure to pay off at some point. If any of you want to share your experiences with concoctions and what you have found that you like or dislike about this archetype, feel free to leave a comment below. Perhaps this video could act as a hub of concentrated feedback for the developers. With that, I'll sign off here. Thank you for watching, and I wish you luck in practicing alchemy.